Hello and welcome to our Fascial Fix for trigger finger. Trigger finger is a condition where one of your fingers becomes restricted and it is difficult to straighten it. So it can be any of your fingers, and quite often it's accompanied by nodules and hardening that forms at the base of the finger on the palm of your hand. And if you feel on your hand, you can feel that below each of your fingers there is a line of tendon that comes down, and it actually goes through your wrist and into your forearm, because the muscles that work your fingers are here in your forearm on both sides, and in particular these ones on this side cause your fingers to flex and for you to be able to create a fist. So sometimes if these tissues all the way in this line from the forearm through the wrist, the palm of your hand and into your finger become too tight, then one of your fingers in particular can get stuck. And for some people they can straighten it if they use their other hand to do that. Other people find that it is just stuck and they can't straighten it. Likewise, you can also get the same thing with your thumb, which is called Duputryens contracture, where your thumb becomes restricted and you might have to manually straighten it, or it can be completely stuck. And in particular with your thumb, you have lots of muscles, 4 muscles in here and another 4 up here that work your thumb. And so if this area becomes stuck, which is usually due to overuse, then this can start to cause problems. In this video, we share some simple self-help myofascial exercises that can start to help the process of undoing some of the restrictions that can lead to trigger finger and Duputryens contracture. In this exercise, I'm going to use a myofascial ball to work on the palm of my hand. Any hard surface can do for this, so it could be the top of a cupboard like this, a desk, kitchen work surface, as long as it's a nice firm surface. And then place the ball on the surface and then allow your hand to rest on the ball. So when you're doing this, you want to have some pressure on the ball, but you're not pushing in. If you start to push in, you're going to start to transmit tension up into your shoulder. So there should just be enough pressure so that you can feel contact with the ball. And as you allow your hand to start to relax around it, you can start to experiment by moving your hand very slowly over the ball. So you can come more up into your fingers, the base of your fingers, maybe around into the base of your thumb, or more towards your wrist. As you're doing this, if you feel any points that feel particularly tight or sore, then wait on those and allow them time to release. From a myofascial point of view, if you do find a tight spot or a painful spot, if you're there for 90 seconds to 2 minutes, then the tissues will start to release and let go. This exercise is particularly good for releasing some of the restrictions that can form in the palm of your hand. The fascia in this area is much thicker than in other parts of your body, and this means that you can do things like gripping and picking up objects, but it also means that this area can get restricted. And in particular, the muscles here from the underside of your forearm, which are called your flexor muscles, come down and they go through the palm of your hand, so underneath the fascia, to attach to your fingers and thumb, and they allow you to grip with your fingers and thumb. Sometimes if these muscles and tissues in your forearm become too tight, they create restriction in the fascia in the palm of your hand, and this can lead to nodules forming at the base of your fingers or the base of your thumb, and they can also lead to conditions such as trigger finger, where a finger becomes tight or stuck and won't straighten, or Duputryens contracture, which is the same thing in your thumb. So working here with a ball can really help to start to loosen some of those restrictions and help to undo some of the tension that may be contributing to those issues. So for the other hand, I'm going to use a trigger point ball. For this hand, I'm going to use a trigger point ball. It's smaller, it's more firm, and it means that it can give a more direct pressure, whereas the myofascial ball gives a more diffuse pressure. So placing the ball on the surface again, I'm going to rest the palm of my hand onto the ball and wait for the tissues to start to soften and release. And as I feel this starting to happen, I can start to slowly experiment by moving my hand over the ball so that it's putting pressure into different points. So it could be the base of my thumb, it could be the base of my fingers, or it could be more towards my wrist. So this pressure you'll feel is more intense, but sometimes this can be good because it really can feel like you're getting into the points that are tight and restricted. If you have any kind of trigger finger issue where one of your fingers is restricted in terms of its movement, straighten your finger as much as you can before you do this. So you don't want to roll over the finger itself, but you do want to get into the tissues at the base of the finger and the palm of your hand, because that's where the restrictions will be that can be contributing to the problem. So when you feel points that feel tight or sore, just wait there for at least 90 seconds to 2 minutes to allow time for the fascia to start to release and let go. This is another exercise that's really good to do at your desk, because you can do this seated or standing, and just allowing things to release and let go. And doing this regularly helps to undo some of the restrictions that may have formed in the palm of your hand. In this exercise, I'm going to use a myofascial ball to work on my forearms. So to do this, you can do it standing or sitting, and you need a nice firm surface like this top here. So you could use your desk, a tabletop at home, even a kitchen counter. It doesn't really matter as long as it's a firm surface. So I'm going to place the ball on the surface, and then I'm going to just rest my forearm on the ball. So when I'm here, I'm just going to allow my forearm to relax onto the ball. So it's just a question of waiting for a sense of the tissues starting to soften and to release. And when you do this exercise, you can work anywhere between your wrist and your elbow. And as you do this, you can just very, very slowly start to roll your forearm over the ball. So as you're doing this, pay attention to what's happening and what you feel. So you may get to certain points where you feel a sense of pain or of achiness or of tightness. And when you get to that, just wait there and wait for a sense of that starting to release. And then you can continue on to other points on your forearm. This area is full of tiny little muscles. They work your fingers. There's muscles on this side of the forearm and also on the top of the forearm as well. And between them, they move, flex and extend your fingers and thumb. And particularly if you do a lot of computer work or gaming or texting or even any kind of manual work, it could be sewing, knitting, carpentry, anything that uses your fingers a lot can start to create restrictions in this area. And then the muscles, which are very small and tightly packed in, can start to get fatigued. And as they get fatigued, it creates more restriction, and therefore it becomes more difficult to do the activities you want to do. Sometimes it can start to create restrictions that cause things like trigger finger or Duputryens contracture in your thumb. And sometimes for other people it creates pain, stiffness, numbness that they feel in their fingers and thumb. So as long as you're slowly rolling over the forearm, you'll find areas that feel tight, and waiting on these will start to release them. So when you worked on this side of your forearm, you can also turn your forearm over and work on the other side. So working on the top of your forearm. So this may feel a bit more wobbly at first when you start, but as long as you relax your hand, relax your forearm, you'll be able to maintain a pressure on the ball and do the same thing, very gradually rolling your forearm over the ball and waiting on specific areas that may feel tight and restricted. And again, you can work anywhere between your wrist and your elbow to release these restrictions. For people who have tennis or golfer's elbow, it's due to these muscles becoming tight and restricted and then pulling onto the point where they attach into the bones of your elbow. So by releasing here, you can help to take some of the pressure off those points and alleviate some of the pain that you feel with those conditions. Generally, this is a great exercise to do for anybody who does any kind of computer work in particular. And if you're an office worker, it's something you can do at your desk. Just take a few minutes out and roll your forearms so they start to release. So I'm going to work on the other arm now, and I'm going to use a trigger point ball for that. On this side, I'm going to use a trigger point ball. This is a smaller ball, it's firmer, and sometimes people find that this is better for working on their forearms. It very much depends, it's up to you whether you want to use the bigger myofascial ball or a smaller trigger point ball. So again, I'm going to place the ball on the surface and just rest my forearm on the ball. And then very gradually, again, waiting for the tissues to soften. And then I can very slowly start to roll my forearm over the ball. This can feel more intense because it's a harder ball and it's got a smaller surface area. But sometimes it can be really good to get into the niggly points that may be causing you problems. These can be restrictions in the fascia and the muscle, and they can have formed into trigger points, which can then cause referred pain patterns, maybe up into your elbow, down into your hand, your fingers and thumb. And very slowly rolling over the ball, working anywhere between your wrist and elbow, finding points that feel tight and sore and waiting on these to release. So you can be here for several minutes doing this, because each time you find a point that feels tight and restricted, You need to be there for 90 seconds to 2 minutes to allow time for the tissues to start to release and let go. So if you find multiple points on your forearms, you can be here waiting on each of these. And this is the kind of exercise, if you do it regularly, it helps to break down those restrictions progressively. And then we can also turn forearm over to work on the other side. Again, being aware when you first place your forearm in here, it's going to feel quite wobbly. Let your hand and your wrist and your forearm relax. And again, just very slowly start to roll your forearm over the ball. So the slower you do this and the more focus you give to it, the easier it is to do. If you go too quickly, you'll find that you just come off the ball. And again, you can work anywhere between your wrist and your elbow. This can help to alleviate symptoms of tennis and golfer's elbow. It can help to reduce pain, stiffness and tightness in your fingers and thumb. And it can start to help to reduce some of the restrictions you may have if you have trigger finger or other restrictions in your fingers or thumb. A nice, slow exercise to do, whether you're at your desk or just at intervals during the day, to help to release and relax your forearms. In this exercise, I'm going to do some finger and thumb pulls, which sounds simple and is simple to do. So starting with the index finger, I'm just going to take hold of the finger. So I've got my other hand wrapped around the whole of the finger, and then I'm just very gently going to start to pull. So this shouldn't be painful. It shouldn't feel like you're putting excess pressure on the finger, but the important thing is to sustain the pressure in the pull, and to sustain this for at least a couple of minutes. So when you do this at home, you might want to rest your arm on a table or on the arm of a chair so that it's comfortable while you do this. The benefit of doing finger and thumb pulls is that it helps to create a little bit of stretch and space in the joints of your finger. The fingers have 3 joints, and these can become very restricted, particularly if you use your fingers and your hands a lot. So it could be due to computer work, it could be due to manual work, hobbies, so anything like knitting, sewing, carpentry, painting, playing the piano. All of these use your fingers and thumbs intensely, and over time the tissues that support the joints can start to become quite restricted, and this can lead to stiffness and pain in your fingers, and for some people it can lead to contractions. So for example, trigger finger or Duputryens contracture, where a finger or your thumb become restricted and you can no longer straighten them. So you can do this stretch, this exercise with any of your digits, and it doesn't matter if you have trigger finger and your finger is restricted. If you can straighten it or even straighten it a bit, then just do a finger pull. And we can also then do a thumb pull, exactly the same thing. Thumbs only have 2 joints, and we're going to just take hold of your thumb. If you can, make sure you've got hold of both of the joints, including the one at the base here, and just slowly start to apply some gentle pressure. So if you imagine that this is creating gaps, it's creating space in tissues that have become very restricted. And this can help to also release some of the restrictions further upstream in your wrist and in your forearms. So don't be surprised when you're doing this if you start to feel sensations not just in your thumb or your finger, but further upstream in your forearm or in your wrist. When you're doing these, as long as you do them for at least a couple of minutes, then it's allowing time for the fascia to start to release and let go. So it's not necessary to do every single finger every single time, but over time you can gradually work your way through your fingers and your thumbs, and you may want to have more focus on those digits where you feel you have more restriction, as this will help to undo some of the fascial restrictions around the joints and in the tissues.